Is there a best fit college for your children? How do we make sure they succeed? What you need to know to select the right college for your child. And on our green tips, a green college dorm. Next on Living Smart. An educational consultant and a mother herself, Dr. Beth Dennard tries to match the right colleges with the right personality. She also helps students prepare their applications for college admissions and scholarships. She has over 20 years as an admissions and school counselor and has visited over 250 colleges to help select what's best for her students. Dr. Dennard, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
How did you get into this? Because there's not that many educational consultants out there doing this kind of work.
Well, it is a growing niche of counseling, and the way I got into it is my own passion for students trying to find their way through and navigate the process of college admissions because it is complicated and confusing.
You know, I hear from some parents and they say, it's just frightful. They use the word fear. It's frightful. And, you know, I never thought of it that way when I was going to college, but things have changed over the years, right?
Things have changed, but there's so many opportunities, and there is a right fit college for every student. One of my early mentors told me she would use this line that there's a Harvard for everyone, and just meaning that there is a really good fit for every single student, no matter what their credentials.
Let's talk about that. How do you begin the process of finding out what's a good fit for a student?
Well, as most people know who've made large life decisions, every large life decision begins with self-analysis, analyzing who am I and what do I need. And I use an assessment called the Berkman assessment, and it's more like an MRI on your personality. It's very, very accurate, and there's a lot of detail, and it helps students see who they are from an objective point of view. I mean, their parents know who they are, they kind of know what they like, what they dislike, but having an objective measure of their interests, their strengths, and their personality really helps as a starting point. Because if you start with where your best friend is going to college or where your parents graduated from, you're making decisions based on someone else's personality and strengths, and you really need to look inside yourself first.
Isn't one of the mistakes that parents make a lot with their children is, well, I went to UT, or I went to, or I went to Harvard, and they want to kind of impose that on their children, and usually children don't tend to have their parents' personality.
Sometimes parents become very enthusiastic about this process, and they're well-meaning, they love their children, they want the best, but they forget that it really is the student's life, it's their child's life. And you're right, the student may be very different from his or her parents, so that's why it really starts with analyzing what you want in a college, what you like, how far from home, what size the university. I tend to be a little bit more biased toward smaller institutions just because of the amount of the discussions you'll have in class, the closer personal relationships you'll have with your faculty members, the opportunities to change majors without big consequences for that. So a smaller institution, there might be a little bit more personal attention.
Describe the characteristics that you want these students, or the wishes that you want these students to go to experience in a college, so that when they go through it, not only are they making good grades, or they're happy, or the experience of college can be so enriching, or it can be miserable.
It really is a life-framing experience.
Yes.
It's a rite of passage for most American young people.
Right.
And right now, a big theme in college going that maybe wasn't so popular when you and I were in college is study abroad. And I know you went to Rome,
yes,
and I just met one of my former students who I asked him how his longtime girlfriend was, and he said, she went to Paris and we broke up after she came back. And I thought, wow, she changed. And, you know, he was heartbroken, but I think he realized, and she realized, having experiences, and also on the college campus, getting involved. I'm a great believer that when people get outside their comfort zone, they learn so much about the world. And so much of college education happens in the classroom and outside the classroom. So I really encourage students to have experiences during college that will allow them to learn more about the world and themselves in the world, their place in the world.
How early should a student, let's say I'm a student watching the show, how early should they be looking for the colleges and to get prepared to go to college?
Well, I believe it's never too early. I believe in bringing your students, your children, to college campuses for concerts, for plays. If you have a college locally, get them on that campus. You know what? It really does demystify college. It makes it more approachable, less fearful. I think the fear factor totally interferes with the process. When students feel more comfortable in approaching the college decision, they're more in charge of it. They take more ownership. Right. So 8th graders even, I used to do field trips for my students' magnet school and taking the 8th graders actually to the University of Houston. They treated us wonderfully. And we got to do the campus tour, have an information session, visit the Honors College. And so these students learned a lot about college as 8th graders. They learned also the requirements. And I think sometimes students don't understand the requirements, like having a certain high GPA, right. Having the test scores, right. Writing the college essay. And from an early age, they were becoming very informed.
So let's say I'm watching and I want to visit a school. What's the first step? Do I call the admissions office? What do you do?
You may call the admissions office, but yet, as you know, so many things have changed in terms of the electronic, the internet is such a big part of
the application process.
Even signing up for a visit, you usually go to the website and you click on Visit the Campus, and they'll ask for your name and like when you want to visit, and they'll give you all the information. You press the button and submit it, and you show up, and there's your tour, and there's your information session.
That's fantastic. Now, how involved should parents be in this process?
I believe the parents' role in the college process is to nudge. Like a lot of God's creatures, the more mature animals and human beings nudge the younger ones. And nudging, not pushing. So nudging means before it's time to apply, you're talking about it as a family, you're meeting to discuss. I believe in having family meetings. Instead of the constant nagging about college, just saying, you know, on Sunday afternoons, it's kind of a good time for a family to sit down and for the student to be in charge of those meetings and to talk about what they've done, what they're doing, not in a way that's that's really not full of tension, in a way that's sort of fun and can be. They could say, well, we can't have the meeting this week because I haven't done my homework, so I need to have the meeting next week. It's a human process.
Right.
So I think the more that students take control of it,
the happier they're going to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And the better decisions they'll make.
Timeline for the college process.
The timeline, I really believe you can start in 8th grade by creating a 4-year plan for high school that fulfills the requirements for getting into the college that you may have in mind or that you don't have in mind yet.
What are the requirements? So because, you know, when I was in high school, one of the things we were told is you've got to be in extracurricular activities, you've got to have a high grade point average, great scores. Today it's much more competitive. What are some of the things kids need to know about college that most of them don't even have a clue about?
Well, the most important thing that students need to know about and start from the very beginning of their high school experience is doing well in their classes and selecting classes that are challenging, the appropriate level of challenge. Because the high school transcript is the main document that's reviewed by the admissions counselors to find out if your student is qualified. So if they have the 4 years of English, the 4 years of mathematics, the 4 years of science, the 4 years of social studies, the core classes, and doing well in those core classes is the primary message I want to send to students. The extracurriculars really are just ways to communicate who they are and what they like and to really enrich their high school experience, but they're primarily there to learn and to demonstrate their learning is demonstrated through their grades and their classes.
Now, I'm a big proponent of community colleges because I think not everybody's geared to go to a big school or an Ivy League, or it doesn't matter. There are schools for everyone, but community colleges play a very important role. What are your thoughts on community colleges, and are the admissions the same as a regular college? What's the difference?
Community colleges are gateways. And right now, a lot of high schools are offering community college classes right on their campus, dual credit classes. Talk about making college accessible. It is right there on their own campus sometimes in high schools. So community colleges, I'm a big fan. I was a dual credit dinosaur. I started taking dual credit classes when I was a senior in high school. And I think I was one of the first students to do that. And it really boosted my confidence. I wasn't a real confident teenager, and it let me know that I could do college. And I started in community college, and now I have a doctorate.
Right.
But everybody has to start somewhere, and I believe that the community colleges focus on teaching. They're not research institutions, so they're teaching, and they have smaller size classes, and their primary role is to teach.
They're also a lot more economical.
Yes, they are.
And that's important too. How do you match the student with the school? How do you do it?
Well, like I mentioned before, I start with who the student is. So you could say it's an A, B, C, D. A would be analyze yourself, self-analysis. Who are you? What do you like? What do you need? And then I go into building the list. Building the list is really finding, almost like a matchmaking process where you're finding colleges that offer the major that a student wants. I'll use an example. There was a young man whose older sister was really a genius, and his father, a very highly successful professional. And this student just felt kind of lost and actually was quite an underachiever in 8th grade. And when I met him, I was doing a presentation at his school, and I was talking about becoming an Air Force pilot or becoming a pilot.
Sure.
And he kept looking at me during this presentation, and I thought, wow, he's really into this.
Interesting.
And he even called me after I left the school, found my number and called me up, and he said, I have now the tools I need to build my life. I always wanted to fly airplanes, and I didn't know how to get there, so I was not motivated.
Right.
So once he found out, oh, okay, I need to challenge myself in math and science in high school. Right. I need to perform extracurricular, get involved in extracurricular activities. I'm proud to say, I'm very proud of him. He today is in pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base, and he graduated from the United States Air Force Academy.
Wow.
But he just needed
little guidance.
So building his list was very specifically targeted toward his future career. Right. Some students do not know what they want to do with their lives. So I'm a big fan of liberal arts colleges, where you become very well educated in a broad array of areas of knowledge, which really equips you to do a variety of jobs.
You gave me an example because I think when you're 18, you really don't know that much about yourself, and you don't know what career you're going to have. You have a vague idea. How do you help kids find that? And should you know what your major is going to be in college and what your career is going to be at age 18? How do you guide them?
There are very, very few students who know exactly what they want to do, like
right.
this young man. That was a rare exception. Mostly students have a direction. Like they want to work with people, they want to work with problem solving, and I identify that through a series of the assessments and also interviews with the students. I like to encourage them to be more broad than more narrow. Many times students will latch on to, I want to be a forensic anthropologist because they watch Bones or something. And I'm like, that's great, but what is a forensic anthropologist?
Exactly.
And sometimes, kids are really under the magnifying glass during this phase, as we've talked about.
Right.
And they just want to get parents off their back. Right. So they'll say a lot of times something just to get some breathing room. But I tell them it's okay not to know. And in fact, the most selective colleges, Ivy League colleges and elite universities, they have an option to say, I'm undecided.
Right. And that goes to my next question. How do you advise students who are undecided?
Well, I really love those students because I identify with that quite well. I tell them to embrace that, to be comfortable in saying they don't know. Usually they're the brightest, and they have the most options. And I think when you have so many options, sometimes it kind of creates a decision paralysis. So what I tell them to do, and they're very highly academic students, I encourage them to do summer programs, enrichment, that kind of gets them out of the books into the real world where they find where they fit, and they start getting information and feedback from the world on, like maybe they discover architecture, or they discover being an intern for you that they love working in media.
Or they hate it. One or the other.
But see, any experience where they're bumping into the world creates feedback.
The real world, yeah. And that leads to another question, which is internships. And is that a good idea before going to college? I
am a huge fan. In fact, one thing I'm adding to my practice is an internship component, because it's very organic for students when they find an area to pursue in terms of a major. Let's say it is becoming a teacher or becoming like I mentioned, an architect. Then there are professionals in the community who would love to have a young, bright intern, even if it's answering phones, they're having exposure to that field. And now with the tough economic times, I'm really believing in working too. Students getting jobs. I mean, when students have work, when they work, they learn time management, they learn responsibility, they learn accountability, they're being trained. And that's something you really don't learn
in college or high school. You just have to learn it in life.
It's more practical.
The common mistakes students make in the application process, what are they?
I think some students can, like we mentioned before, the timing, they start too late.
Right.
And really, ideally, right now, junior year, like January of junior year is when the juniors should be like pouring on the gusto in terms of researching colleges. So giving yourself enough time to plan out all the steps, because it is very complex.
Well, one of the problems, though, students have and parents have is money. And a lot of people are not aware there are a lot of scholarships and grants and federal aid. What's the first step to take to find out? Should you say, well, I can't go there, I can't afford it, or should you just start the process and then find out what money is available?
I believe having a budget talk with your parents is like the sex talk. It's very, very important. And, you know, parents sometimes are a little bit embarrassed that they haven't saved enough and they don't really want to talk about money. But I think having a baseline, like saying, okay, I can afford an in-state public education. That's what I've saved for. And telling your son or daughter that and saying that's the baseline. Just like when your student wants to buy a pair of expensive jeans, you say, well, I can afford the generic Penny's brand. And if you want the extra special brand, that's going to take scholarships and loans. So the students know what their budget is. And then, you know, they can choose, when they create the college list, they should have affordable colleges on that list, safety colleges that they know they can get into and pay for. Then they should also include some dream schools and some reach schools, because colleges do offer financial aid. And right now in January is the first month you could actually have access to the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. And that is the form that parents and students submit to find out their eligibility for federal and for state and institutional aid.
Now, the other question is during the application process, there are things that parents need to know so that they can help their kids. What are some tips that you would give parents throughout this process on how to work with their children?
For one thing, there are some great websites that give the timeline. It's the framework. And just to oversimplify it a little bit, I would say spring of the junior year is the time for creating or building the college list and making the match. Summer, they can actually start the application process, believe it or not. Summer before their senior year. And especially for students involved in extracurriculars that require a lot of time, like football or a drill team, make sure they start in the summer. If they know the basic timeline, parents can nudge. They can say, hey, you know what's coming up. And you don't want to be overstressed when you're in the middle of football season, do you? So encouraging them and working with a consultant. Actually, what I do is I do keep students on track, and that's a big plus with working with someone who's objective and knows the process.
Do you think there's a college for everyone? Let's say you're the kind of kid that did really well in school. You made wonderful grades, but your test scores are terrible. You're not a good test taker. I don't know if you've met kids like this. I was one of them. How do you deal with that? How do you help kids with that? I'm sure there's a college for everyone, though.
There is, and I have students from every single part of the GPA and the class rank. I work with students from the entire spectrum, and there are those really, really bright kids who just don't test well. And sometimes they need accommodations, that is extra time on testing. I worked with a student who had a language learning disability, dyslexia. And so helping those students to really practice the test. I believe the test, it's like I ran the marathon a couple years ago. I would have no more thought of getting up on Sunday morning and running 26.2 miles without practicing than the man in the moon. You really need to practice when you're facing something difficult like an SAT or ACT, which is almost a 4-hour test. It's a long test. So even if you can't afford private test prep or to have a tutor, I think practicing the test is a really good way to prepare and also to lower your anxiety so that when you go in, you're just calm and you're ready to do your best.
And they're free, not free books, but you can get books in the library to prepare for the SAT, and you do suggest that kids do that, even if they're really smart.
Yes, I do, Patty, because preparing is the key for life, being prepared.
That's very good. You talk about pitfalls, the unique problems that multifaceted students have. Tell me some of those.
Well, I think sometimes students can oversimplify the process, and that is, we just had the football national championship, so the schools that are in the limelight get all the attention from students. They're just longing to go to those schools, and I think kids can oversimplify by just choosing the schools that are in the limelight. On the other hand, a pitfall is to, the multi-potential students can have so many options that they become sort of paralyzed with indecision. So what I like to do is sort of like take a lot of complicated information and boil it into a manageable set of information. So starting with a list of maybe 15 colleges for those students, and then helping them research and knowing why that school is a good fit, like a matchmaking process.
What about the professional student syndrome? That was me. I wanted to go to school forever.
Well, that hits close to home for me too. And higher education has a lot of career opportunities as well. So if you love education, there's so many jobs right here at U of H, right here in any major university. They hire a large number of well-educated people. So I don't really discourage that so much, but I do think that more and more colleges are encouraging internships where the kids have to get out from behind the books and get into the real world and figure out, their place in that world.
What about, you say here, limited exposure to the real world? That's one of the pitfalls these students face. What do you mean by that?
I mean, students know a lot about school. They've been in school for 10, 11, 12 years. That is their realm. That is their domain. That's where they live for 8 hours a day. And if they're involved in an extracurricular activity, they're going from practice to school, to practice, to home, to dinner, to bed.
Which is really the life of our kids today.
They're overscheduled with sort of like this pattern.
Activity after activity after activity.
And rigorous academics. So what I encourage students to do is to, during the summers or spring breaks, when they have little pockets of time that they can decide how to use it, that they really be intentional and create experiences that will give them more life exposure, like the internships. NASA, Johnson Space Center, has some wonderful programs. They have a thing called Inspire, and they hire high school students to work alongside NASA engineers to do real problem solving. And more companies in this recession, small businesses are looking for an extra set of hands. And I think students can approach small businesses and say, I just love to shadow someone who's in this job. It could be an orthodontist, it could be a professional, it could be somebody who is a machinist. Any spectrum of work.
A great idea to do some shadow work. How do you know that you're living smart?
I'm living smart when I'm living with integrity. That is, I'm following my passion, and my passion is to help students get into the right college.
That's wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us. And now on our Green Tips, Rice University's Richard Johnson and Spencer Howard share how they achieved a LEED certification in their university dorms. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design.
We're taking a number of steps to achieve a LEED Gold certification with Duncan College. From an energy perspective, we're using thick walls and energy-efficient lighting, efficient windows, and smart thermostats that in total will reduce energy consumption by over 50% in the building. We're also reducing water consumption by 40%. We've recycled almost 95% of the construction waste on site, which is fabulous. We also have wonderful access to natural daylight inside the student rooms, and we've used healthy materials in the interior finishes to improve indoor air quality.
There are several sustainable features that we have here in the student rooms, starting with our low-impact finishes. We have polished concrete floors, burnished block walls, low VOC paint on the chipboard walls, and we also feature smart thermostats that learn the patterns of the students. There are sensors in the doors and windows, so when those are opened, it powers the system down, and there are infrared sensors that sense the occupancy, so when the students are not in their rooms, the system powers down as well. We have access to daylight in all of the rooms, including the buildings. Over 95% of the spaces have access to that daylight. The double student rooms have bathroom pods that have been pre-manufactured off-site. They were built and then delivered to the site right as the brick walls were going up, and then we plugged them into place.
To learn more about green tips and how to get your kid into the right college, go to our website. There you'll also find a complete resource list. You can also email us or call us with your comments at 713-743-8513. And that's our show for today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Remember to live smart. I'm Patricia Gras. Have a joyful week.
For a transcript of this program, send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.